Ragnarok has come and gone, but God of War Ragnarok will still be reverberating for years to come. The Norse chapter of Kratos' journey is over, but who knows what's next for Atreus? We'll have to wait for the facts to come out, but in the meantime, here's 107 facts about the cataclysmic conclusion to the latest God of War saga. This is 107 facts about God of War Ragnarok. Number 1. Just like its predecessor from 2018, God of War Ragnarok was developed by Santa Monica Studios and published by Sony. Number 2. However, Ragnarok had a change of leadership behind the scenes. Unlike God of War 2018, Cory Barlog would not be the director. Number 3. Though Barlog stepped down as director, God of War Ragnarok was still in more than capable hands when Eric Williams took the position instead. Number 4. Eric Williams is no stranger to God of War. He's been with Santa Monica Studios and the God of War series for years, since he worked on the very first PS2 God of War as a combat designer. Number 5. In a way, Barlog stepping down as director shouldn't come as a surprise, since the original God of War games is practically a tradition that every God of War game has a different director. Number 6. Of course, Barlog didn't disappear from the project altogether. While he's not directing, he's still heavily involved in God of War Ragnarok as a producer, and was a key player in the game's development. Number 7. Passing the baton to Williams, Barlog gave him free rein to tell the story. All he handed off were 3 key events that needed to happen in God of War Ragnarok. 1. Ragnarok needed to go down. Simple enough. 2. Atreus needed to leave at the end of the story. And finally, and again, spoilers here, Brock needed to die. Number 8. Barlog and Williams had discussed Brock's death for a while before settling on the decision. Of all the characters they could have chosen, they felt that losing Brock would have the biggest emotional impact because they considered him to be the family dog that tied the cast together. Number 9. Before a sequel was ever officially announced, we knew Ragnarok was coming. Aside from the ending and post-credit scenes of God of War 2018, Santa Monica Studios put out a dynamic PS4 theme with a key hint. The theme features Kratos and Atreus sitting on a boat in the Lake of Nine. Looking closely, you can read the runes on the boat. Translated to English, those runes read, Ragnarok is coming. Number 10. At the same time, in April 2019, Cory Barlog put out a series of tweets to celebrate God of War 2018's first anniversary. Turns out that the first letter of each tweet spells out Ragnarok is coming. Number 11. Those 2 cryptic hints were all we had to go on until September 16th, 2020, when Sony had their PlayStation 5 showcase. They unveiled a God of War teaser with a few lines from Kratos and a line that read, "Say it with me now, Ragnarok is coming." Number 12. By this point, everyone was speculating that the game would be called God of War Ragnarok, but Sony had not confirmed it. Number 13. At the time, all Sony revealed was the tentative release window for the next God of War sequel, sometime in 2021. Number 14. Of course, as we know now, that originally planned 2021 release date got pushed back due to the pandemic. COVID aside though, development was also delayed due to a series of health problems that Christopher Judge had. Number 15. In August 2019, Judge had to get a ton of serious surgery. He needed to get his back and knee operated on, and even needed both hips replaced. Judge said that at the time, he could barely walk before the surgeries. Number 16. Thankfully, Santa Monica was patient. The studio allowed Christopher Judge all the time he needed to recover before he jumped into the production to play Kratos once again. Number 17. Health problems aside, Christopher Judge actually briefly quit working on God of War Ragnarok altogether. Once he caught wind that Barlog wasn't directing this time around, his initial reaction was to jump ship. Number 18. Fortunately, Barlog convinced him to jump back on, and that Williams is a more than capable replacement in the director's chair. Judge eventually came around and recognized Williams as the beast that he is. Number 19. Sure enough, once the dust settled, Christopher Judge was locked in and returned to play Kratos for God of War Ragnarok. Number 20. Eric Williams said that Judge knew Kratos even better than the writers did. When recording, Judge would sometimes opt out of saying whatever Kratos' written line was. Instead, he would simply react with Kratos' now signature grunt. The writers were usually on set at the time and would always roll with the decisions that Judge made in character. Number 21. Judge was also responsible for another subtle Kratosism. If you listen closely, you'll notice that Kratos never uses contractions. That's all Christopher Judge. He would catch contractions in the script and correct them to make Kratos' more stiff, stern way of talking. Remember, it's not "I don't need a snack," it is "I do not need a snack." Number 22. When God of War Ragnarok was first announced, it was only announced as a PlayStation 5 exclusive title. At the time, prospects of a PS4 version were looking dodgy. Number 23. A few months later, around November 2020, Sony CEO Jim Ryan was asked about the possibility of God of War Ragnarok releasing on both PS5 and PS4. He simply responded with, "Sorry, I've got nothing else to say about that today," still leaving everyone in the dark. Number 24. The chances of a PS4 Ragnarok seemed dubious for a long while, until June 2021. Finally, the latest God of War game was confirmed to have both a PS4 and PS5 version. Number 25. This makes God of War Ragnarok the first God of War game to launch on 2 different generations of consoles. Number 26. While it was good news, the cross-generational announcement was the most tangible info Sony had put out since September 2020. Sony even had a whole state of play in February 2021, but Ragnarok was not on the docket. Fans started sweating enough to prompt Cory Barlog to give his own Twitter update about the game's release window. When it's done. Number 27. So by June 2021, we learned that Ragnarok was coming to PS4 and PS5. Unfortunately, we also learned that neither version of the game would be coming out till 2022. Number 28. The news of God of War Ragnarok's delay was dropped by Herman Hulst, lead of PlayStation Studios. Number 29. Also, at that same time, Santa Monica Studios put out their own statement about Ragnarok's delay on Twitter. Number 30. According to Hulst, the decision to push Ragnarok back was made due to the heavy amount of motion capture and talent that the production required. With the pandemic in full force, Sony and Santa Monica Studios needed to make sure everyone working on God of War was safe during COVID, without sacrificing quality. Number 31. Hulst even mentioned that to capture performances safely, Sony went so far as to build tiny studios in some performers' homes. That way the performers could be able to safely record from home. Number 32. So sure, the pandemic was an obvious obstacle. However, there was another ticking clock looming in the background, an ever-growing Atreus. The production cycle was so long that Atreus' voice had considerably dropped and sounded completely different by the end. Number 33. Of course, Atreus is once again played by Sunny Suljic. Number 34. While Suljic is 17 now, he was only 13 when they started production on God of War Ragnarok. If you can believe it, he was 8 years old when he first auditioned for God of War 2018. Number 35. Obviously, God of War Ragnarok doesn't take place over the span of years, so with Suljic's changing voice, the team had to even out his performance so that players wouldn't feel that so much time had passed. Number 36. The task was left up to supervising dialogue designer Jody Kupsko. Number 37. At one point during production, Suljic's voice had dropped so much that he had to re-record basically the whole game, and not even just speaking lines. He also had to completely redo breaths and efforts, like when he swings his bow or gets into the bar fight. Number 38. It was a ton of extra work, but Suljic managed to turn lemons into lemonade. He felt that his performance was much better the second time around, and that the final version is the one that he wants everyone to see. Number 39. Jumping into God of War Ragnarok, both we and Sunny Suljic know that Atreus is actually Loki. So, to prepare for his performance, Suljic took notes of inspiration from Tom Hiddleston's version of Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Suljic watched the Loki series, but made sure not to copy Hiddleston's performance wholesale. Number 40. That wasn't Suljic's only preparation though. He also dove headfirst into Norse mythology, Ragnarok especially, to better inform his performance this time around. Number 41. In general, now that Sunny Suljic was more experienced compared to his first outing as Atreus, he brought a whole different process to Ragnarok. For one, he read the complete script for Ragnarok instead of just his scenes like he had done for the previous game. Number 42. For God of War 2018, Sunny Suljic's face was so small that the mocap team had a tough time putting the dots on his face to record. Well, now that Suljic was more grown, it was a lot easier, and he feels that this version of Atreus looks a lot more like him. Number 43. Facial expressions are one thing, but Suljic struggled with one particular aspect of his mocap performance: standing still. While filming idling, as he called it, Suljic would overthink it, so they needed a lot of different takes of him simply standing in place. Number 44. As hard as standing still must have been, Atreus' first scene with Fenrir was even harder. Suljic's own dog had died not too long before filming, so saying goodbye to Fenrir, he brought that into his performance. Number 45. Ariel Angelotti is the senior producer at Santa Monica Studios for God of War Ragnarok. Number 46. Angelotti oversaw how filming would play out so that the production was COVID safe. To reduce the amount of people on set, she and the team would have main actors play stand-ins for background characters. Number 47. While Santa Monica was still hard at work on the new God of War, the public still had no idea what this sequel was even going to be called. Suddenly, in May 2021, the world got a glimpse at a Sony investment filing which included a logo that said, God of War Ragnarok. Number 48. However, not long after the report was published, the God of War Ragnarok logo was amended to a different logo that simply said God of War. So what happened? Why the change? Number 49. Well, turns out the logo that Sony used was actually an unofficial fan-made logo. Somebody at Sony pulled it off the internet, and Sony mistakenly published it in their investor report. Number 50. Finally, a few months later, in September 2021, the title of God of War Ragnarok was officially announced during the PlayStation Showcase. That's also when Eric Williams was announced as the director. Number 51. Getting the official title was a big deal for sure, but the showcase dropped an even bigger bomb that nobody was expecting. God of War Ragnarok would be the conclusion of God of War's time in Norse mythology. Number 52. From the jump, Kratos' adventures through the Norse realms were always planned to be a trilogy. However, Santa Monica Studios decided to condense what would have been the second and third games into one. Number 53. At first, much of the Santa Monica team was resistant to the idea. They'd been preparing for a trilogy the whole time. However, word came down from the top, and Barlog and Williams insisted that it be one game. Number 54. Rich Gobert is the lead writer for God of War Ragnarok, and also wrote God of War 2018. Number 55. According to Gobert, there was a lot of back and forth at Santa Monica about whether or not Ragnarok should be 2 or 3 games. Number 56. With all the debating, the team finally decided to settle the matter, so they left the final decision up to Cory Barlog. His input? Forget a 3rd game. We're gonna make it all happen in 2. Number 57. Sure enough, Barlog had his reasons for squeezing the rest of the story into one game. For him, a key factor was the time of the development cycle. Creating an entirely separate 3rd game would take the production timeline of the would-be God of War trilogy close to a total of 15 years. Barlog felt that would be too long. Number 58. And he's not wrong. All in all, God of War 2018 took about 5 years to make, while Ragnarok clocked in at around 4 years, so a 15-year cycle wasn't out of the question. Number 59. Barlog compared the continuity between the 2 God of War games to the extended edition box set of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. Sure, going through them takes a long time, but the 2 games feel like a cohesive story, start to finish, if you sit down and play them back to back. Number 60. So with the decision made, Santa Monica pushed to cram everything into one game. However, they made sure not to cut any corners from the story they wanted to tell. Eric Williams said that the only real story adjustments that were made were for the sake of pacing. Number 61. Santa Monica Studios started working on God of War Ragnarok back in the fall of 2018. To start out, Cory Barlog and Eric Williams gave the team a 100-page inspiration book, packed with ideas and concepts of what they wanted to do in the game. Number 62. The point of the inspiration book was to keep the team focused on the art amidst the ever-changing, ever-advancing tech of making video games. Number 63. For the story, the book broke it down into quarters. Santa Monica would hold meetings where Rich Gobert and Matt Sophos would tell the story like, as Williams put it, 2 grandpas at a fire. Number 64. Oh, and for the record, Matt Sophos is the narrative director of God of War Ragnarok. Number 65. Like any game, developing God of War Ragnarok came with its own set of challenges. As you'd probably guess, the game started becoming much larger than the team had anticipated. Also, the team worried about doing Ragnarok itself justice in just one game. Number 66. Santa Monica first started playtesting the game back in 2019, and they occasionally got some rough feedback. Eric Williams would have to step in sometimes and tell them to kill their darlings. If players don't like a certain thing in the game, then they don't like it. Instead of trying to improve it, he would encourage the devs to cut it and work on something else. Number 67. In fact, Eric Williams said that just 3 months before Ragnarok was released, some folks on the team were freaking out that the game was not good. Number 68. Well, it may have been a sprint to the finish line, but after about 4 years, God of War Ragnarok released on both PS4 and PS5 on November 9th, 2022. Number 69. Funny enough, the release date itself is a kind of Ragnarok Easter egg. The day before, November 8th, there was a blood moon, a total lunar eclipse where the sun, moon, and earth are all in line. According to Norse mythology, Ragnarok begins when the wolves Hati and Skoll eat the sun and the moon, turning the moon red. Number 70. As for the game itself, it feels familiar to the previous 2018 God of War. Of course, a new game means new features. The most obvious one is that for God of War Ragnarok, you can play as Atreus. Number 71. Kratos gets some new gear as well. The Leviathan axe is back, and you get to wield the Blades of Chaos from the beginning, but Kratos gets an all-new weapon at a certain point of the story, the Draupnir Spear. Number 72. A new weapon is a big deal, but Kratos gets a few other little tweaks as well. This time, Kratos grapples up ledges using the Blades of Chaos for faster traversal. He also has a new drop attack that you can use to attack enemies and break through certain floors. Number 73. God of War Ragnarok adds a special new collectible, Kvasir's Poems. Each poem is a reference to another Sony-published game. For example, Sanguinity? That's a reference to Bloodborne, upon pursuing a place not marked on maps. Uncharted, and my personal favorite, Tool and Bang, Ratchet and Clank. Number 74. While Kvasir's Poems are worth a laugh, God of War Ragnarok has one especially touching side quest, the Ballad of Jari and Sommer. The quest itself and the rune initials in the hearts are a memorial to Santa Monica developer Jake Snipes, who died in 2020. He and fellow Santa Monica dev Sam Handrick were in love, and Handrick pitched this request to be included in Snipes' memory. Number 75. As for the main story, Kratos and Atreus have to go up against the might of their new enemies, the Aesir gods. And no Aesir, aside from maybe the Allfather himself, are mightier than Thor, played by Ryan Hurst. Number 76. Like Sonny Suljic, Hurst also pulled from the MCU for his performance, but not Thor. Instead, he was more inspired by the Hulk. Specifically, Hurst looked to the Hulk's sense of rage, and how his strength manifests itself in unpredictable ways when he can control his anger. Number 77. Hurst was also inspired by Tommy Lee Jones's character from No Country for Old Men, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell. When playing Thor, he wanted to convey a similar sense of regret in his voice. Number 78. Okay, so we know why Thor sounds the way he does, but how about his look? Well, Santa Monica's red-haired, big-bellied Thor is actually considered closer to Norse mythology than the Hemsworth version of the MCU. Number 79. There was some backlash to this bigger Thor when he was first revealed on September 9th, 2021, alongside the State of Play. Raf Grassetti, the art director for God of War Ragnarok, showed him off on Twitter. Number 80. Enough about Thor though, how about the other Aesir? Well, for the scheming mastermind of Asgard, Odin, he's played by longtime character actor Richard Schiff. Number 81. And as for Odin's personal guard dog Heimdall, he's played by Scott Porter. Number 82. Ben Prendergast plays the Norse god of war Tyr. Though he sounds different this time around, you'll know Prendergast from his performances as Hughes in Apex Legends, and Patroclus in Hades. Number 83. In Aussie himself, Prendergast actually pitched the idea that Tyr have an Australian accent to Matt Sophos. Unfortunately for him, it didn't stick. Number 84. The last of the giants, and according to Norse myth, the mother of all monsters, Angerboda is played by Leia de Leon Hayes. Number 85. When Hayes was announced to be playing Angerboda, Santa Monica faced some backlash. People were making a stink about how Angerboda being black was not accurate to the lore, and that she should be white to fit into the Scandinavian setting. Number 86. Matt Sophos defended the casting decision, pointing out that all the liberties that Santa Monica has taken with the lore to no complaints. For example, Mimir is Scottish even though he's from English folklore, and Brock talks like a foul-mouthed Texas prospector. Hell, their version of Loki is a quarter Greek demigod. Number 87. Ratatoskr is played by Sungwon Cho, aka ProZD. Of course, he did the voice, but he also did the motion capture and even worked with the writers to craft his scenes. Number 88. Also, for God of War Ragnarok, we finally get to meet Kratos' late wife, Faye, aka the Giant, Laufey the Just, albeit in flashbacks. She's played by Deborah Ann Woll. Number 89. Once again, Bear McCreary composed the entire soundtrack for God of War Ragnarok. Number 90. McCreary even has an in-game cameo. He plays the dwarf musician named Rabe, which is bear spelled backwards. Number 91. Like God of War 2018, the entire game of Ragnarok takes place in one continuous shot. There are no hard cuts in the entire game. Number 92. On a technical, graphical level, God of War Ragnarok has two modes. One gives you a higher resolution at 4K but limits the frame rate to 30 frames per second. The other mode prioritized performance, offering 60 frames per second but only at a resolution of 1080p. Number 93. If you play God of War Ragnarok on PS5 and a monitor that supports HDMI 2.1, you'll have access to two additional options, a 4K 40 frames per second mode, and a mode that syncs to 120Hz. Number 94. Bruno Velasquez is the animation director on God of War Ragnarok. Part of his responsibilities included making sure the game was running up to spec. Number 95. Velasquez said that to make sure the game ran on PS4, God of War Ragnarok does not fully use the capabilities of the PS5. He described the PS5 version as an enhanced version of PS4, but ultimately both still provide the same experience. Number 96. On launch, Ragnarok was missing one feature though, photo mode. Less than a month later, Santa Monica patched the mode in on December 5th. Number 97. God of War Ragnarok has over 70 accessibility features, and PlayStation even has a dedicated website that explains each one. The feature lets you tweak everything from the visuals, audio, and controls to customize your experience. Number 98. Like the armies of Helheim, gamers amassed and bought Ragnarok in droves. The game sold 5.1 million copies in the first 5 days. Number 99. This makes God of War Ragnarok the fastest selling first-party launch in PlayStation history. Number 100. God of War Ragnarok won 6 of the 11 game awards that it was nominated for. Best Narrative, Best Score and Music, Best Audio Design, Best Action Adventure, Innovation in Accessibility, and Best Performance. Number 101. At the Game Awards, Christopher Judge's acceptance speech for Best Performance lasted 7 minutes and 59 seconds, setting a record for the longest acceptance speech at an awards show. Number 102. Not content with that, Judge also lobbied to play Kratos in the live-action God of War series in production over at Amazon. And yes, he was adamant that he'd be a better Kratos than Dave Bautista. Number 103. As amazing as he is, Judge doesn't play Kratos alone. Eric Jacobus did all the combat stunts and combat motion capture for Kratos, just like he did with the previous game. Number 104. As for the PC release of Ragnarok, don't hold your breath. When Barlog was asked about it, he said that it's up to Sony, and if Santa Monica were to try their hand at another PC port, they'd have to learn more about the process. Number 105. While a PC port is off the table for now, it's not an impossibility. God of War 2018 eventually came to PC, but it did take a long time. It didn't hit PC until January 2022, nearly 4 years after it came out. Number 106. So how about DLC? Again, don't hold your breath. Eric Williams said that there are no planned DLC expansions. Number 107. However, there is something to look forward to. God of War Ragnarok will receive a new Game Plus mode sometime in spring 2023. So, 107 God of War Ragnarok facts later, and I have to ask, what was it all for? Do you choose to be nothing? Or are you a calm and reasonable person? You seem like a calm and reasonable person, so I think you should subscribe to the Leaderboard.